Hi guys, glad to be back with you again. It's week 3 and gosh, it feels like we've come a long way already, but yeah, today I wanted to talk to you about something that, as I've been getting your feedback and as I've been seeing what you've been sharing in the Facebook group, what's become really obvious to me as something that's going on for a lot of you is you're starting to see that anxiety is nothing but a massive amount of overthinking. Right? That's the only thing that's going on. And you have a massive amount of overthinking. It feels really uncomfortable. You make meaning of that thinking, and that creates the feelings of the sweaty palms and the racing heart and the knot in the stomach and the gnawing anxiety that stays there all day or that comes up first thing in the morning. Okay, because all we can ever feel is our thinking in the moment. And if you're feeling whirring thinking, then you're going to be experiencing like the feelings that are associated with that. Okay, if you're feeling worrying thinking. So most of you, like, get my little diagram out, most of you are starting to see that this is anxiety, right? And that getting caught up in your thinking is creating and causing your anxiety. But then what I'm seeing from you guys is you're like, yeah, I get it, I know I'm overthinking, so I need to stop. Like, how do I stop overthinking? Right? Like, I get that I've got this really busy mind and that it's whirring and whirring and whirring and whirring, and I get that is my anxiety. I'm starting to see that maybe it's not caused by motorways or hospitals or going out of the house or a particular person, but I'm starting to see that every time I feel anxious, what's actually going on is I've just got, my thinking's got revved up. That's the only thing that's going on. So right now I need to stop. And then you try and ignore that thinking, or you try and distract yourself away from that thinking, or you try and look at that thinking and see it as thought, right? And we have all these tactics and strategies. Once we see the cause of the problem, i.e., you start to see the cause of the problem isn't this thing outside of us. The cause of this problem is this, us experiencing this. Then you try and get in here and try and fix this. And that's mainly because you guys are a lot of fixers, right? You've gone through life kind of controlling things, making things go your way, creating and shaping the outside world so that you can be okay. And your constant activity in trying to control and manage the world, even before any anxiety came onto the scene, my guess is that that's always kind of been the way that you've operated in the world. And so what that's done is actually kind of cause and create the anxiety. And so when you see that it's just your thinking, your natural tendency is, oh, I know what to do, I'll get in there and try and fix that, I'll try and change that, I'll try and see something new about it, there must be something I can do about it, now I see what it is, right? There's a problem here, I know I need to get in and fix it. And this is where you're kind of getting in the way of the natural flow of thought, right? Allowing this to happen, because the truth is you don't make that happen. And this happens for lots of reasons, and the way that this starts to dissipate and the volume of the noise starts to quieten down is not by you saying, right, must quieten it, like I'm going to meditate, I'm going to, like, all those things you're trying to do to control it are actually whipping it up into a frenzy, which is really frustrating, because you're left with, well, if there's nothing I can do about it, how do I change it, right? And so what I want to do over the next couple of videos is I want to look at why we overthink, right? What is it about that overthinking? Like, what is it? We think it's serving us in some way, which is why we continue to do it. But when we see some of the other things that I'm going to point at, what you'll see is that you start to realize that you don't have to do that thinking, that it just will start to drop away on its own without you having to do anything. And it'll be easier and more effortless than you ever think is possible. And it really won't take you doing any of it. So I'll give you an example of how kind of easy and effortless how this kind of understanding works, right, for starters. So at some point, and I'm going to use an anxiety example and then I'll use a different example as well, but at some point when you had your anxiety, it might have looked to you that the only thing to do is to take medication, And so you go and you go and ask for medication, and it looks like that's the only thing that's really going to help. And then suddenly you realize that there's all these things like tapping or CBT or books about anxiety and panic that you hadn't even been aware of before. And suddenly there are more possibilities to you as to how to deal with your anxiety. And this whole kind of world of possibility and opportunity opens up that before you just thought that you had to take a pill and there was no other option. Now, that's a really simple example of a shift in consciousness, right? A raising in your level of understanding about what's possible for you in that, just using that as an example, right? And my guess is that you don't have to do anything to make that happen. It's like you realize that there were tablets you could take, and then after some period of time you realize you had a shift in your understanding, and you realize actually there's a million different ways of helping myself with anxiety. Now, you were not in control of the process of that realization. It's just something that kind of occurred and happened to you, right, as you move forward with your life. And another example I want to give you is actually, this is probably a better example. It was, and thank you to the person who shared this with me, but because it really made it clearer for me as well. But so she had been having some problems sleeping, and again, the same thing is like at a certain level of consciousness, you think that if I want to sleep, then I need to take a sleeping tablet. It's the only option. And then what happened for this person in particular is that she started to realize, actually, I don't want to take sleeping tablets. There's all these other ways of managing my sleeping habits and behaviors that I want to go and experiment with and go and look at in more detail. And she is at a level of consciousness where she had like 100 different options of different ways to manage her sleep. But there are gazillions of people walking around in the world who think that sleeping tablets are the only way. And she was able to see that that's a shift in a level of consciousness. Right? Her understanding changed. She didn't really do anything. It's just that one day she thought they were just sleeping tablets, and the next day she saw that there was all these different opportunities. An insight came to her, information came to her, it occurred to her, and she now had all these different levels of things she could go out and try. And what I was pointing to is that there's infinite levels of that understanding, right? So even if we look at the levels of sleep, if you start to see more the truth about what prevents us from sleeping and how sleeping gets disrupted by like huge thought storms, for example, or frantic thinking, then it occurs to us that there's different ways of dealing with that problem. And so there are different solutions that open up to us at this level of consciousness. And then, but that's infinite, so it goes on and on and on, right? There's like always more to learn, there's always more to see, but we're not in control of it. We don't have to manage that. And I mean, the clearest example is, you know, I think I've used this before, but as children, we learn to crawl, and then we learn to walk, and we learn to speak, and we learn that this thing is our hand, and we learn that that thing is our mum or our dad. And all of that stuff that we learn is just part of our natural, it's built into the system, right? There's an intelligence there that kind of, when the time is right, we have a shift in consciousness and we realize this thing belongs to us, right? And nobody teaches us that. It's just that that's the way that understanding happens. It unfolds, like the truth becomes more apparent to us as we play in life, as we look in the direction. So even as a little baby, you know, we have no idea that it's true that our hand belongs to us. And then one day we realize it for ourselves and it becomes true, and suddenly there's all these possibilities that happen that didn't occur to us before. And so that's what I want to explain about how this understanding unfolds. It's like, it's so frustrating to hear, especially if you're a control freak, right? Especially if you think that there's something you need to do to get this understanding. It's so compelling to think that I have to do something with my thinking. So when it occurs, I have to do something with it. And I'm pointing you in the direction that's already being taken care of. Just the fact that you come here, that you're in this program, that you're listening to this video, is the natural evolution. Like, you listen to the video last week, you listen to the video next week, you'll listen to the video today, and all of this that you're hearing and listening is taking care of what needs to be heard. Like, you'll hear whatever you need to hear in the moment. But while you're sitting there writing notes and trying to work it out and trying to understand it and getting frustrated that I get this, but I know it's only in my intellect and I need to really see it for myself, like, all of that thinking is what's getting in the way of what I'm pointing to being able to kind of seep in round the back. Now, I used this example a few times on coaching calls this week, so I'm going to share it with you today as well. And what it seems to me is that when we have anxiety, when I'm sitting with someone who is experiencing like a high volume of thought and stressful thought that's really stressing them out, it's like there's a fan whirring really fast around your head, right? Like, if you imagine one of those, just a fan, right? Like a whoosh around your head. And it's like, I feel like I'm trying to chuck cards and it's just bouncing off the fan, right? Because the whirring's going on so fast. And what I find is that the way that I see this understanding works, it's like my fan is spinning really fast, and I mean, I can get in there and I can fiddle with it and I can try and do stuff with it, but every time I touch it, every time I go near it, just speeds it up even faster, right? And there's like these little insight fairies that are like floating around over here, and they fly up and they're like, you're trimming their wings, right? Every time they go near, they're like, oh no, I'm not going near that. And they come up and they can't get anywhere near you because the fan's spinning so fast. And then sometimes you'll experience a period of quiet inside of your head. And what happens then is the insight fairies, they're in, right? And they get in there and they do stuff in the back of your head, and then off they go again. Their work is done. And you look out through your eyes and the world looks different. You look out through your eyes and this thing belongs to you, right? And it didn't before. And now you can do things with it and you couldn't before. And that's what I see happens when, for whatever reason, the fan stops whirring quite so fast. It's that insight is that passive and experience, that if we just stop poking the fan, the insight fairies can get in and do their work. Now, obviously, there aren't really fairies and there's not really a fan, and I hope you get and understand that. But that's the way I see the insight comes to me. The minute I give up, the minute I stop pissing around with the fan and just mucking around with it all the time, then the insight fairies are free to get in and do their work, and it's almost like I'm asleep, I'm not involved in that process. It's such a different type of learning than what you've been used to. I want you to think more baby learning to walk than learning how algebra works in a maths class, right? That's the difference with this kind of studying and understanding. And what we are going to go through over the weeks is, the reasons, like, I see the solution to anxiety is that as the fan starts to slow down, the insight fairies have far more opportunity of getting in, right? They can get in anyway, even when you're going really fast, and I want to talk about that as well. But you're going to take more in if you can stop messing around with the fan. So let's look at some of the reasons why we do mess with the fan, like why we think it serves us to go in and speed the fan up. And I want to take them piece by piece, but I just want to talk about one for this week. And this was a huge insight for me. And what happened is I'd been watching a series of videos, and it was about a woman, and I think she had this like food ice cream craving or something. She was trying to lose weight, but she kept having these really compulsive thinking about no, it wasn't, sorry, excuse me. It was a woman who I was watching and listening to one of my colleagues, Linda Pransky, coaching someone who had panic attacks. Forget the ice cream. The ice cream was a totally different story that Linda was telling. This woman had panic attacks. And what she suddenly saw while she was doing this coaching session was that oh, when I have a panic attack, I can take care of it then. Like, I don't have to figure it out in advance. And I heard that, and it resonated at such a huge level for me, because one of the things that I was very fearful of was having a panic attack or having a migraine. And I suddenly, what landed for me was, oh, when I have a migraine, I could take care of it then. And up until at that point, I had spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, future planning. So I was up in my head, right, if I get one now, who am I going to ask to help me? I need to check my pockets, check I've got my phone. If I get one when I go on the motorway, who am I going to call? If I go more than 25 minutes from the house, or 26 minutes from the house, like, what's my strategy going to be? If I go out and the sun comes out, like, I need to make sure I've got sunglasses so the light's not too bright. If I have a panic attack, I need to make sure I've got a paper bag with me so I can breathe in and out of a paper bag. If I get a panic attack when I go into the supermarket and I have to run out, like, what am I going to do then? And my whole thinking was, my fan was full of and whizzing really fast with what ifs. And I was just projecting all these scary things into the future. And then I was trying to put in place plans to control that eventuality happening. And when I saw that, oh my goodness, when it happens, I could take care of it then. Because every time it has happened, I did take care of it. Right? So I either pulled over to the side of the road, or I left the supermarket, or I left the cinema, or I cried and then I felt better, or I took a migraine tablet and managed somehow against all the odds to get myself home. Right? I managed to get the kids looked after by somebody else, or I managed to, I always managed it. I'd always managed it, because I'd come out the other side and I'm here to tell the tale. And I saw that, and for me, all that thinking dropped away, all the future planning thinking, because I suddenly realized future Nick could take care of it. And I didn't have to think about it. Present Nick didn't have to keep thinking about it. And I saw that so deeply. And it was followed up really swiftly by an even cooler insight. When I started to kind of get a little bit of understanding, this was really early on in my journey, I started to get this little bit of understanding about mind, this greater intelligence that we've referred to in this conversation called mind. And I started to see that the thing that I saw was, when it happens, I'll be taken care of. And by that I mean, I don't even have to come up with the answers when it happens, because mind comes up with the answers. Like, there's a wisdom, there's a common sense that comes in just when it's required, that has my back. So I went from, wow, I could take care of it when it happens, to even better, I'll be taken care of when it happens. And so I started being less, with that insight, all that thinking fell away, and I started being less scared of having a migraine or having a panic attack or feeling anxiety, because I knew that, because I could look and see all the evidence in my past, and it was a knowing that I had, that when it happens, I'll be taken care of. Such a huge, huge relief that it wasn't on me, that it was taken care of, and I didn't have to do it. So I want to share with you, as we go through the weeks, some of the reasons why we spin the fan. And I had been spinning the fan because I thought I had to future plan for every single eventuality, so that I knew that I could cope if it happened. And when I suddenly saw, I don't have to do that. This is what I always see when I understand the principles more and more. You mean I don't have to do that? That's like 90% off my to-do list. That's all I spend every day doing. Then that falls away, and I didn't have to stop the fan spinning. The insight that I got through that meant that the fan just started to slow down. So that's one thing I want to point you towards. For many of you, I know, with anxiety, you are spending your time future planning. You're thinking about the future, constantly thinking about the future. And to see that there's something, that we have this resource, that we have access to this greater wisdom, that we don't need to figure it out in advance. When you start to see the truth in that, I can guarantee that a whole load of your thinking will drop away. And then job done, right? There's like a lot less thinking going on. And some of this drops away, and there's just not so much noise in your head, which A, is a lot more relaxing, so you're less stressed out to start with, and B, gives the insight fairies far more chance to get in and do their job. So we've talked about fans and fairies and all sorts today, but I'd love to get your feedback. Let me know what lands for you from me sharing this. And I'll be back next week with more reasons as to why the fan is spinning, like why we keep going in there and spinning the fan. And as you start to see the truth of that, it will just make less sense to you to get in there and spin the fan. And if you are not in there doing it, its natural default is to slowly spin down, slower and slower and slower. Okay, so that's how this happens. Like, you don't have to work as hard as you think you do. There is always less to do than you think. Right, I'll speak to you next week.